have another great fellow who's going to introduce his amazing project today. I mean, we love Ali's project, but we also love his discussion. He's always driving the discussions and the thing, and we love his passion for charter cities. So yeah, Ali, please introduce yourself to everyone, and please tell us a little bit about your project.
As a background, I'm born and bred here in the UK. I am from a subcontinental background and always had an interest in seeing how the relationship between these two identities will emerge out of the post-colonial world into, dare I say, the freer market world. I have a background professionally as a journalist in Syria before the war. I helped set up Syria's first English language daily newspaper. Being a linguist who studied Arabic and history, that led me to work across the Middle East in many various guises. Specifically, and most importantly, I guess, to my interest in charter cities, I worked as a cross-jurisdictional lawyer for a large international law firm based in Dubai, where my role was to see what the actual practical elements of what happens when you create a charter city happen on the ground from a litigation perspective. Just over the course of this small sort of chat, the introduction I'm going to give to the wider paper, I'm going to focus on three things: the role of debt, the role of the common law charter, and the DFI model. Now, the reason why I place the role of debt in here is because we take it for granted often that debt is a major part of the way infrastructure projects work. But when you think about the fact that actually a lot of the people who might be interested in financing charter cities that come from a Silicon Valley milieu may not be comfortable with, or may not have driven their success through, the debt model. And more than sort of an instinctive idea of that being a reality, there is a statistic that only around 16% of venture financing in the US is venture debt. The rest is private placement and equity. And I think the reason why that's relevant is because if you're coming from a background which in our day and age is the space where adventurous, creative ideas are turned practical, be they the Facebooks of this world, or be they the next CPaaS tool or SaaS tool, your natural way of thinking about how to finance a project is very equity-based, right? Only 16% of that market so far have thought, okay, well, actually, if I raise debt against this, I'll be able to sort of finance this without giving an equity portion. And what that means specifically in Global South infrastructure is that you're looking at finance houses with credit committees that are willing to take the risk of what was once upon a time perceived risk, as well as actual risk of what it's like working in these emerging or risky markets. They have historically, anyone who providing debt wants something tangible against that, not just an idea, right? They want something that says, okay, well, listen, if you can't pay me back with money, then I'm going to take the asset that you're trying to buy. No, you're trying to build, right? And so with infrastructure, it's traditionally been a case of saying, okay, well, yes, I'm thinking about financing your project to build, I know, a series of roads or a series of factories in, say, Tanzania. But there's a huge amount of risks that I've come across that I'm wary of, and there's a huge amount of sort of contingency which we need to get over. And so therefore, even if I did finance it, there might be a bottle of reward. It's going to be really costly, and there needs to be a guarantee in place against which I can put that money, right? So it's always been traditionally quite difficult, and only really the space of those who are really well connected at the top of sort of state governments or incredibly large institutional operators that have had the opportunity to go in and do this historically, because of the legacy of the imperial and the colonial era, where everything was state orientated, and every post-colonial era institution that had contact with these parts of the world were at that state level. So only relatively recently that the private individual or the private company can go in and actually build things on terms that are outside of the institutional mainframe. And that's where there's a huge opportunity. In order to make that happen now, one needs to do so with the right relationships and knowledge in place. So, and expectations, the fact that infrastructure projects realize capital long term. This isn't a quick 5-year, 7-year exit cycle that a venture capitalist would necessarily be interested in. This is looking at something which is either a permanent capital vehicle or something which makes you feel as though you're comfortable that you are actually, as an asset owner, making your money off the land arbitrage, right? So you're going to buy a plot of land. You're going to take the debt to build the stuff on the plot of land that is going to make the plot of land more valuable in the future, and you're going to make your money off that arbitrage. That's the main thing that's going to interest somebody putting their money into this. Before I get onto the relationships to strike, it's worth putting in what the actual part, the charter part of this is, right? So beyond this being a tangible infrastructure project, my actual interest as a planner, or my actual interest as an architect, is the planning the architecture put into the actual charter, the legal infrastructure, the channels that allow for capital and human endeavor to flow through particular mechanisms in order to create a community that people hopefully benefit from. And the reason why there is so much emphasis in my talk about common law is because as a common law trained lawyer working in civil code jurisdictions, of which pretty much half of sub-Saharan Africa is still Napoleonic code civil code jurisdiction, is that in practical terms, when it comes to finance, when it comes to building, when it comes to insurance, when it comes to all the elements that make infrastructure trade and construction possible, one of the biggest issues has been what happens when you have to rely on a law that doesn't actually, or a legal system that wasn't ever designed to promote terms in terms of commerce, right? Common law is historically an English way of applying a legal system where, for a very simplified version, the rights of the individual and their right to contract and their right to apply themselves in terms unto themselves is kind of formally enshrined, right? And as such, it's traditionally uncodified, at least in this country, in the UK. It's inherently pro-commerce in, small terms to do with, let's take an example, liquefied damages or force majeure. We just had COVID, right? What happens when force majeure hits the scene and there's a situation where nobody can do any work? Under the common law, unless specifically stated to have a force majeure clause, you can't rely on that for liquefied damages. Whereas in civil Napoleonic code, quite a different way of looking at the way society works, you can automatically rely on something like force majeure in that situation. All that said and done, I wish I could talk more about that because I love geekily talking about it, but the reality is that the common law model has historically been an easier model for international trade to operate through, which is why the common law island model has appeared in places like Dubai or Astana or in Abu Dhabi or Doha, and increasingly wider afield. It's also very simply because if you're coming from a common law jurisdiction like the UK or England, Wales, or Scotland, or Canada, or the United States, you're used to contracts working in a certain way, right? Your risk is mitigated quite a bit if the mechanism by which you enter into a trade is under terms you already know and understand. So that's just a very natural sort of commercial way of selling the reality of the idea of a common law island without it being a form of neo-colonialism, so to speak, where you basically say, okay, well, I'll only work with places like myself. You could just create a small little split of land that doesn't affect the sovereignty of the surrounding jurisdiction in terms of criminal law or in terms of wills and trusts and probate and things people are passionate about as cultural laws. It just helps trade happen. Now, the DFI model is representative of the balance one needs to strike when emerging out of the historic way in which things work. If one is a committed libertarian, for example, and saying, no, I really think that the best way to do it is to operate on one's own terms to build contracts of mutual benefit. In reality, the sort of ecosystem on the ground in, say, sub-Saharan Africa is very DFI heavy and is only just merging out to that. What we've seen in the UK very recently, for example, of the sort of defunding of DFID, the Department for International Development, is and that funding, instead of going to the Department of Trade and Industry, is a mindset shift from the idea of dealing with sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world from patron to neighbor, What that does mean, however, is that that ecosystem still exists, even though it is changing and emerging. What these development finance institutions have on their, onto their benefit is a hugely developed understanding of the network and accessibilities and capabilities of the areas in which there are a lot of greenfield sites available for charter cities. They have the relationships politically with the states, which need to be a stakeholder within any charter city model. And they are the place where one is increasingly finding that the guarantees that need to be put in place in order to have a finance house come in and say, okay, yeah, I'm comfortable to fund this, let's go, are provided by those DFIs, right? So if you are an interested asset owner and saying, okay, well, actually, this is a lovely idea, but in reality, I'm not entirely sure I can raise any collateral against which to raise debt and don't even know where to go. DFIs, companies, for example, like Garant Co. Here in the UK are finding that a way to legitimize the role of that sort of development space within a wider privatized market is to act as a guarantor that allows for that initial debt but both subordinated and wider afield to be raised for these projects. And that's where I think the future of charter city, or rather global south infrastructure development, is going, where you can create a balance between the ecosystems that have happened at a very, very large institutional level, with this increase in institutionalized sort of greenfield thinking. It's like a balance between the model of building a city out in the middle of the ocean and actually talking to shipbuilders to say, okay, well, how do we make it a sustainable city to float on water? And in terms of appetite across the global south for these kind of models, this is increasingly being found in spaces working out of Dubai or farther afield as the way forward for those who are interested from the West to approach it as an interested private party. That's a very, very, very terse summary of the paper that I wrote.
Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you for being part of this fellowship. You have contributed majorly. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Hiba. Thank you.